So let us start another episode of our discussions on software evolution as a part of software engineering activities. So we have already discussed in details software SDLC, software development life cycle. Do remember, this is a very, very important part of software engineering. You must have read in details in your regular class. I would still suggest as a textbook, you can concentrate on Somerville, the software engineering by Somerville. Pressman is also fine, but Pressman is generally meant for management students, not for computer science or IT students. Somerville is a much more balanced book. You can also read the book by Ghezzi, Ghezzi. So Somerville, Ghezzi, and to some extent Pressman. These three books. So we have already discussed goals. All these we have discussed. Code and fix, today's environment. All these we have discussed. So there's no point in repeating whatever we have discussed. If you have any question, please don't hesitate to ask. Waterfall model, we have discussed in details, plus and minus points. Significance of waterfall model in software evolution process, we have discussed that. Then we have also discussed evolutionary model. In between, we had mentioned prototyping. We have also introduced both types of prototyping. That is, we should say, evolutionary prototypes and throwaway prototypes. And we have discussed the advantages of evolutionary model, which is essentially the de facto standard in today's software development process. Then we have also introduced a spiral model. Again, this is the de facto standard in today's software world. And we have also noted that spiral model to some extent is some kind of a meta model, in the sense that in its phases, in its different phases, it may use other models as well. Like it may use waterfall model, it may use prototyping model, but from a broad perspective, spiral model is now the de facto standard in industries. So far, this is what we have discussed, apart from general discussions made earlier. Any questions? I will wait for 30 seconds and then go ahead. Okay, so if you don't have any questions, these are the spiral model. In the passing, we should also refer to Jackson system development. This is more of a functional decomposition kind of approach and based on object-oriented design. So what it means? It's something like this. When you design I'll just discuss this in the passing, not in the main flow of discussions. When you make any software, of course, you make it in terms of modules. And the modules may be required in sequence. Maybe some of the modules have to be chosen, and iteration may be required again and again. So these three basic constructs make the complete software architecture. That makes the complete software architecture. By software architecture, I mean this modules connected by interfaces. That is essentially software architecture. And in this form, you can articulate the entire design very well. It can be proved. I just wanted to mention this in the passing. And for those who are more interested, for Jackson development process, you can refer to the book by Pressman. Before going further, let us recapitulate that basic statement which we accept as a gospel in any discussions on software engineering. Because even today, there are some misconceptions about what software engineering means. So we have read it many times, but since we use it as a gospel, let us mention it again before I go to the next set of discussions. What is that? The discipline of software engineering deals with studies on science, engineering, technology, and management of feasibility study, design, development, testing, deployment, maintenance, and evolution of software products and services based on mutually agreed upon specifications, time estimates, and cost estimates, with embedded focus on maintainability, scalability, reusability, reliability, and reconfigurability. Please concentrate on the words which are in bold and or in italics. Out of this, we have already discussed in details about the relevance of software engineering in the context of words like science, engineering, technology, and management. We have also discussed in details on evolution of software products. In the passing, we have mentioned the difference between software products and services. Probably we'll take it up again later on. Feasibility study also we have discussed a bit. Now, design, development, testing. Please do recollect that in our waterfall model, generally we do not refer to testing as a different phase nowadays. This is a standard practice. Why? Because unlike in the previous days, when testing meant testing of the software product, today we have to test every intermediate stages as well. Testing of requirements, testing of functional specification, testing of design, testing of deployment, like that. Why? Again, since the waterfall model, which is very often at the heart of spiral model also, works on the fundamental premise that development is made in different phases and output of stage I becomes input of stage I plus 1. And naturally, before taking the output of ith stage to the I plus 1th stage, the ith stage activity needs to be tested and the interface also needs to be tested. So in today's terminology, generally testing is considered to be an integral part of software development process, right from the day we start the feasibility study till the day we deploy and then maintain. Remember this very well. When you face the interview boards on any IT company, this you must remember. And you must also remember what I mentioned earlier as well. The reason for software failure or underperformance of any software product is, at least in 70 to 80% cases, because of the failure in articulating requirements properly. And it also makes sense to identify the error, if any, as early as possible in the development life cycle. We'll discuss this when we study software testing. But for the moment, because you must remember this, because once the product is made, we have already spent time, energy, effort, everything. So there's no point in testing. And moreover, the failure or underperformance of any software product is most of the time due to improper articulation of requirements, and then requirements to function, and then. The idea is to capture any error, if at all it exists, as early as in the software development process. That saves time, energy, and efforts. And the other part also we have mentioned, that maintainability is generally not used today. Today we say that a software evolves, in the sense that suppose there is a bug in the software, you take care of that. Instead of saying it is maintained, today we say that the software has evolved from version 1.0 to version 1.1 or version 2.0, where the previous bugs have been taken care of. So instead of using the word maintainability, you will find in many places, and I do subscribe to that idea as well, that today we assume we accept that the software evolves. If minor changes, then it's version 1.1 to 1.2, 1.3, like that. If there are major changes, then version 1 to version 2, 3, like that. So these are the these are the basic premises for us to move ahead. We have already discussed this, but still I wanted to have a brief recap and to remind you again and again, please remember all these when you face the interview board for any IT companies. And those 4 steps, if you remember, I will tell again that what are the essential requirements to land up successfully in any interview process. Number 1, of course, you must be very strong in coding. That's number 1. No compromise with that. Very strong in coding. That is, it could be Python, Java, or whatever. No compromise with that. Number 2, you must be very strong in basic subjects: data structures, algorithms, architecture, software engineering, database management systems, computer networks, and so on. If you are asked, what is your favorite subject, you should always restrict yourself to those core subjects. Don't get carried away by fancy words like AI, ML, IoT, deep learning, and all those. Don't get carried away by that. And never say that if you are asked what is your favorite subject, don't say that it is Python or Java or something like that. You must be very strong in those subjects. but those are in the background. Just like you think of any singer, who are really good, they have to be very strong in classical music. When you ask what songs Manna Dey used to sing, you would never say that it's classical music, even though he's very strong in classical music. It's something like that. So number one, coding, but in the background. Number two, absolutely basic subjects, and never ignore basic sciences, physics, chemistry, and maths. Most importantly, maths, discrete maths, graph theory, combinatorics, and all those. This is number one. This is number two. Number three, attitude. You must be having some sessions on behavioral science, organizational behavior, and all those. How to be assertive without being aggressive. And in terms of attitudinal aspects, I have been saying many times that the first thing is you should be a good listener. You should be a good listener. In many cases, most of our students, even faculty, even we all tend to react even before hearing what the other person is saying. Never do that. When you are asked a question, or somebody is saying something, listen very carefully, attentively, and once he or she is over, then only you react. If you have some issues, you can ask him or her to repeat. But never intercept the person who is talking. And this is the most important artifact. Then, if you know the answer, it's fine. But even if you don't know the answer, how you handle the question, you should never answer any negative way. Like it was not taught, it was not covered in the syllabus, like that. That gives you a very negative impression. You can clearly say that's sorry, I don't know. There's nothing wrong if you do not know something, because that shows that you know something else. So third part is all these communication skills, how to be assertive without being aggressive. Never be aggressive with anybody. But assertion, yes, you should be assertive with calm, quiet. So number one, number two, number three. And number four, this is what we are discussing. Before you go to the interview board, read exhaustively about the company for which you are going to appear. Remember, software companies may be of many types: product orientation, service orientation, cloud orientation. Then some may be consultancy firms. So depending on the nature of the business of the company, this will you have to adjust yourself. Even say for Microsoft, if you apply for an interview in Microsoft development and Microsoft research are entirely different ballgame altogether. I tell you again and again. If you appear for Microsoft development, it's practically entirely coding with huge focus on data structures and algorithms. On the other hand, if it is Microsoft research, then it is entirely on algorithms, design analysis of algorithms, graph theory, combinatorics, and all those. So similarly, if it's a service sector company, then coding will be there, but you have to understand the behavioral science also. So these are the four pillars on which you should prepare yourself for appearing to interview board. Now, so as I have mentioned, we have already discussed feasibility study and evolution of software products. Let us now try to concentrate on design and development. This slide is basically for today's consumption. Let me see. So what are the intrinsic facets of software design? Generally, very few of these we follow in our classroom, and that's the problem. Software design must be characterized with modularization and structuredness. So, if the software is too big, even at the design phase also, if it's too big, divide the software in terms of modules. Divide the software in terms of modules, and they should be interconnected through some structure. You must have heard the name structured programming. Whenever you write a program, you must write in a structured manner. You must write in a structured manner. So having given a code of say 10,000 lines, how do you know that it is mentioned it is written in a structured manner? Then it has to satisfy several properties. It has to satisfy several properties. What are those? Modularity. Just how I have said, they should be written in terms of modules. Each module must have the property of single entry and single exit. That means you cannot get out of any module from anywhere within the module. Similarly, you cannot get into anywhere inside the module from outside. So it has to be single entry, single exit. It has to be single entry, single exit, which essentially means there should not be any unconditional go-to or unlabeled go-to. Language C supports this kind of go-to, but you should never do that. Of course, most the actually object-oriented language, they inherently do not support that. And thirdly, entire program, however it lines of code. One is sequence, begin end, curly bracket. The other is condition, if then else, if then case, and iteration, do while do, for next, like that. So if the language supports at least one construct out of these three different kinds of constructs, it can be proved that that is enough to develop a code for any particular algorithm, whatever complex it may be, however big it may be. Now remember, this basically enforces some discipline in the coding activity. As always, discipline cannot fully implemented by force. One has to be inherently disciplined. As for example, when we drive in our road, just see how we drive. There are so many rules. And if you go to Singapore, the same people, just see how they drive. If you go to Germany, just see how they drive. Exactly in the similar manner, having given an algorithm, you can very well write it in any language, even basic Fortran, no problem. But those do not force you to write in a structured manner. Just like if you write in Java, there is no way you can write your program in an unstructured manner. So they force you in doing that. And the other thing is, I don't remember, probably I have mentioned already that all our discussions, of course, these programs will run on a machine. So it must be compatible with the hardware also. So whatever we are discussing are based on what is known as von Neumann architecture. Von Neumann architecture. What are the postulates of those von Neumann architecture? First of all, sequential flow of execution. Sequential flow of execution. Because it works on a single processor environment. If you have 100 lines of code, ith statement will be executed before I plus 1th statement. And once you execute a statement, there's no way you can undo that execution. That is also important, provided you do some kind of tricks, but that's a different thing. In fact, it is on the basis of that, together with locality of reference, that the program counter works. So this is so the von Neumann architecture, single sequential flow of execution, then data and instructions are indistinguishable. Looking at the code, I say that machine level code, there's no way to understand how this which represents data and which represents one because and instructions, because they all is represented by 0 and 1. Also, if you remember, you must have studied in your class that if you see the evolution of computer as a machine in terms of first generation, second generation, third generation, like that, initially this evolution was based on changes in technology. Vacuum tube to LSI, LSI to VLSI, and all those. But the concept remained same. That is von Neumann concept. It's only in 4th generation and later on we shifted to non-von Neumann architecture. Non-von Neumann architecture. And the first thing which got changed is, in many cases now, we do not restrict ourselves to single processor. We can have a multi-processor environment. We can have a multi-processor environment. But I'm not going into details of that. Only thing is, when we discuss something, we should be very clear about the boundary conditions under which our discussions make sense, which under the constraints within which the premises we make are valid. So this is modularization and structuredness. I'm just taking a break for 30 seconds. If you have any questions, please ask. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate. So we have discussed modularization and structuredness, and naturally, interface and architecture will come together. The moment we have a system with several modules, they have to be interconnected. And the moment they have to be interconnected, proper interfacing has to be made, and the architecture should support that. One example I give always to impress upon the requirement of standardization in interfacing. Today you see there are so many types of bulbs, but electric bulbs, but the holder is same. Tomorrow if you come up with a new technology bulb, it will not find any taker unless the holder remains the same. It is precisely for this reason, mostly, that quantum computing is facing challenges. It is true that quantum computing is going to be the future. But the problem is, as it stands now, since the basic concept is different in quantum computing, whatever huge repository of softwares are available today, most of them will not be usable in a system based on quantum computing. And there lies the problem. Whenever you come up with a new technology, previous applications you just cannot discard. Just see this automobile industry. Phenomenal the way they have advanced. But now, if you want to shift to electric vehicles, the basic technology itself is different. Where do you have the charging stations? Where do you have the people to maintain those new set of cars? Naturally, at a time when technology changes very fast and moves ahead of the society, we got to be very careful. And this is where I caution you again and again. Media-driven publicity. We talk about AI, machine learning. Artificial intelligence was in practice since 1960. Japan was very strong with AI. So, but of course, today, again, at least in near future, AI, ML, they are going to stay. But try to understand the basic features. Because today, learning is not enough. Learning to learn is what you have to understand. Learning to learn, because the technology is changing very fast. And that's the reason I'm impressing upon you again and again. Never, never ignore subjects, physics, chemistry, maths. Basically, in computer science and IT, this discrete maths, graph theory, combinatorics, matrices, linear equations, and all those. Otherwise, you'll be facing huge, huge problem. So, and because of this modularization, structuredness, today we talk about software architecture very commonly. You must have studied hardware architecture. So if we consider a module, as a node and connection node of a graph, say, what is a graph? It's a set of nodes and edges, vertices and edges. So if we consider a module as a node and interconnection between two modules as an edge, that gives a graph. Then looking at the graph, you cannot distinguish between hardware architecture and software architecture. Both of them can be treated more or less in the same way. Once you convert that architecture to a graph, abstract level, take it to the abstract level. Then comes coupling and cohesion. Coupling is an intermodular property. Coupling is an intermodular property. And cohesion is an intramodular property. Cohesion is an intramodular property. That means the statements within a particular module, they all must work towards achieving some particular goal, which is again a sub goal in the context of the entire program. Suppose you are developing a software for your university examination system. Then there, students can be one module, teachers can be one module, questions will be one module. So the statements within any particular module, say student module, they must have some relevance to the students. And also don't forget, whatever I may have mentioned, that whenever you write a code, it is expected that about 70 to 80% of the statements are document lines explaining what it is being done. And also there should be inherent implicit documentation. Instead of writing XYZ, you write the variables or objects as roll number, name, etc., etc. And coupling is, we have a student module, we have a teacher module. So how they are interrelated, how they are coupled together. So coupling is intermodular property. Cohesion is intramodular property. Ideally, your design must be characterized by low coupling and high cohesion. Low coupling and high cohesion. High cohesion is obvious. You include a statement within a module because it contributes to the purpose for which the module is being made. That's obvious. And why coupling should be low? Because of maintainability. If something goes wrong, if something goes wrong in one module, it should not reflect much into the other modules. For those who are interested, you may have seen that in very old TV, you would have seen just one big motherboard. And whenever there is a problem, the engineer or technician used to find the fault in the motherboard and then got the necessary correction done. Nowadays, those days are gone. You have several slots. In computer also, you have several slots. Nobody attempts to repair at the cheap level, at the micro level, because that is more expensive, much more expensive. But this makes sense only if coupling between the boards or modules, whatever we say, that is very low. So low coupling, high cohesion, interfacing and architecture, and basic is modularization and structuredness. Then comes abstraction and information hiding. Abstraction and information hiding. You must have studied this while discussing object-oriented methodology. When I say int I, say int x, this is an abstracted form of many information. What are those? X is a variable, x is an integer variable. Then it is expected that x consists of 2 bytes. That means highest integer can be 32767 and lowest is minus 32768. So this is abstraction. I am not saying many things which are abstracted. And in many cases, I need not have to know in many things. Like in C, they support life of a variable and scope of a variable. Scope, you know, local or global. And what is life? That is used through static or auto or register, these kind of constructs. I hope you understand the difference between life and scope. But to make it clear again, I give you an example to explain the life. Scope, you know, it's local and global. Life means, suppose I have made a function f and we have an integer there as an object or a variable. Another main function is calling this function f, and at the time of entry to m, the main function, that x was, say, 5. After execution, if x becomes, say, 10. And the job with the function is done. After some time, that function is called again. Now, what would be the initial value of x this time? Will it be 5 or will it be 10? You can do whatever you want to do if you are working in C. So this is the interpretation of life of a variable, where you decide, the programmer decides how long how long the changes of a variable should remain in the place where the this thing is stored. Of course, this has some relationship with parameter passing, call by value, call by reference, call by name. Again, you must have studied in compiler design. Then comes scalability and reconfigurability. Scalability is obvious. See, railway reservation system. Initially, it was supposed to cater to probably 1,000 terminals. Now it is supporting maybe 10 million terminals. Whenever you write a code, you develop a product, right at the design phase, it should start with your requirements phase. To what extent it should be scalable. Today, when you buy a car, you don't move at a speed more than, at least in India, more than generally 70, 80 kilometers per hour. But there's a provision to drive the car at 200 kilometers or 150 kilometers as well. Of course, we have to be very careful that in the process of this scaling up, are we compromising with the functional properties of the product? Then there is a problem. Then this is not proper scalability. If I scale up and there's a degradation in the product, say this response time falls. In some cases, probably the GUIs do not work properly. So this is scalability. And what is reconfigurability? Essentially, it deals with the architecture. It deals with architecture, where your software architecture, your modules remain same, but the edges are reconfigured. Edges are reconfigured. It is very often required in making a product, software product, say for an organizational, say HR department, human resource development, where every organization will have an organizational hierarchy, or who reports to whom by designation. We have the software made. Tomorrow, probably that rules of reporting gets changed. X used to report to Y, but tomorrow X has to report to Z, not Y. Do I have to redo the entire program? No. So, this is reconfigurability. And this scalability, reconfigurability, and all those scalability, all those are possible only if we follow the concepts we have already mentioned: modularization, interfacing, coupling, cohesion, abstraction. Without that, you cannot do it. Say, it's very common. You have a, say you have a mobile phone, or you have a laptop with memory probably 4 GB. Tomorrow, you can add up another 4 GB and your mobile now has 8 GB memory. Similarly, you have a processor of certain speed. Can you add another processor to increase the speed? Of course not. Of course not. Similarly, scalability and reconfigurability, these are definitely very much desirable criteria, but they have to be mentioned. They have to be mentioned right during requirement specification that, okay, this is what we are visualizing today. Tomorrow there may be a need to scale up the domain of the horizon of applications much larger, much larger. So that has to be kept in mind. Scalability and reconfigurability. Say today you build a house 2 stories. Tomorrow you can go up to probably 4 or 5 stories, depending on how you had made the initial platform. That is scalability. If you see today's construction sites, many buildings, they have only load-bearing walls. Within the wall, you may have 3 rooms, 4 rooms. You can change the configuration of the rooms by soft partitions. That is reconfigurability. So these are, so today you develop a software to take care of the transport system of, say, Kolkata, which has, say, so many buses, trains, trams, metro, etc., etc. You develop that, and it's a very complex thing. You can consider this as a typical project also. But when you develop the product, tomorrow, if the number of buses increases by 2-fold, can your software take care of that? If the routes changes, can it take care of that? These are scalability. In fact, another characteristic I have not mentioned here, that is known as portability. In this particular case, I have developed this transport network software for Kolkata. Can we use it for Delhi as well? Both are cities, many commonalities, many uncommonalities as well. Can I do that? If we have to do that, what are the changes to be made? And reconfigurability is also basically like that. The routes are changed. So what do I do? The rules for recruiting drivers, conductors, they have changed. So what do I do? So at any point of time, even before we start coding, we should be very careful, very thorough about all these background information, about all these. And again, I'm sure I have told you earlier as well, typically, now we know SDLC, Software Development Lifecycle. If a company, IT firm, works on some particular software project, if the total duration is, say, 6 months, estimated duration, not more than 20% is reserved for coding. So 80% of the time in software development life cycle for any particular cycle, keep on cycling, is reserved for taking care of all these activities. Checking requirement specification, functional specification, design, what are the requirements in terms of scalability, portability, reconfigurability, and all those. So all these, testing, etc., all these, and then of documentation, of course, all these have to be thoroughly done, and then only you go for coding or implementation or deployment. But there is a certain difference between implementation and deployment. Deployment is you deploy in the client's site, customer site, and that is also has to be tested. It's very common that you have developed a product which is working very fine in your lab. Tomorrow you go to the customer side, there's something wrong somewhere. Probably the OS version is different. Some libraries are not available. So all these have to be tested very, very carefully before getting into proper coding. And nowadays, many parts of the coding are also automated. So chances of error in coding is getting much and much less. But thumb rule is, the more you go for automation of coding, the less is the efficiency of the code. That means the code may take more time, more space. But since we have almost infinite amount of memory space for us, speed of the processor is practically no problem, except for some special type of problems. We are not bothered with that. We are more concerned with the other aspects, maintainability, scalability, and all those. We still have some more items left. I leave it for the next class. Any questions? Any questions?